from the time I was in utero and could start to sense the outside world, the way my mom moved, the way my dad moved, the tones of voice, all those different things were part of my consciousness. They were always more than one. When I came out and I could start to see, my father was a different skin tone than my mother was. My mother spoke a different language than my father spoke. My brother, right? So as a 3-year-old, and I went to someone else's house where the two parents looked the same, they spoke the same language, I'm thinking, what's wrong with this family? They're not normal, right? So from taking it from a toddler's viewpoint, my house is normal.
Episode 20, A Different Normal, with ethnic studies scholar Curtiss Takada Rooks. Hello everyone, welcome to CrossWorld Puzzles. Today I'm honored to welcome Dr. Curtiss Takada Rooks, Assistant Professor of Asian and Asian American Studies at Loyola Marymount University. Curtiss researches mixed race identity and is a highly respected speaker and thought leader. He's also a beloved professor who's led multiple student exchange programs between the US and Japan and has supported many communities with issues on identity and diversity. As this podcast focuses on multicultural individuals, I'm especially excited to speak to him about his personal and professional experience as an Asian American and Black individual, as well as his academic perspective on it. So thank you, Curtiss, for joining me today.
It's my pleasure to join you. It's as I've said, talking to you before, I think what you're doing is fantastic and really needed in terms of how all of us need to sort of figure out how to walk through the world at this point, particularly with in the United States where things are very difficult in terms of feeling divided.
Thank you, Curtiss. That's really helpful, and that's something that I'm also struggling with, so I'd love to talk to you about that. So please tell us first where you were born and raised.
Well, I was born in Camp Zama, Japan in 1957. As a infant toddler, we moved to Manhattan, Kansas, actually Fort Riley, Kansas, and then from there we moved to Manhattan, which was about 21 miles east of Fort Riley. So I started my kindergarten years there, and then as a military family, we began to move. So I've lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We lived in Wilmington, North Carolina during my 3rd grade year. My father was in Vietnam. My mom had some medical issues and was in the hospital, so we went to live with my paternal grandparents in Wilmington, North Carolina. And then we returned back to Kansas when my mom was out of the hospital. Then we got stationed at San Antonio, Texas. From San Antonio, Texas, we went to Okinawa, and that sort of was my junior high years. And then we returned to Fort Riley when I was in the middle of my 8th grade year, I believe. And then I stayed there through high school. So my erstwhile hometown in the United States is Manhattan, Kansas, because that's where I started school, and that's where I ended up graduating from high school. And it's also where my mom made an important home for herself among the Black women's community there in Manhattan, Kansas.
Wow, that is fascinating. And thank you so much I was going to ask you where your hometown is, but thank you for explaining that's actually Kansas. So did you get to visit Japan on occasion to see your mother's family at all, or speak Japanese at home?
Well, we did speak some Japanese at home. My brother, who was 3 years older than I was born in Yokohama. And so their predominant language was Japanese. The situation after the war and during this sort of occupation period, both governments did not want the two to get together in marriages and things like that. So they really put up roadblocks. And so my parents, as did a number of folks, if you take a look at Stephen Shigemasu Mercy's When Half is Whole, he talks about this as well. Many of during that time period when non-officers were not getting permission to get married. The couple would get married in a civil service, not recognized by either government. Once a child was involved, then suddenly all the bureaucratic red tape would sort of disappear, because at that point it could become international embarrassments for both countries. So my brother was born a Japanese citizen, and so he is actually on my mom's koseki. I was born as a U.S. citizen. They got married in the interim, and so I was born at the U.S. Army Hospital. But when we got to Kansas, certainly we spoke both Japanese and English. When I got to kindergarten, we were doing sort of flashcards, right? You know how in the kindergarten they're putting up animals and everybody's going cat, cow, all those things. They put up a squirrel. You can imagine how difficult the word squirrel would be for someone who grew up speaking Japanese. About something like squaru or something like that. Anyway, I couldn't pronounce it. But I wasn't going to be embarrassed in front of this class. And my brother and I called squirrels kunchans. We had made up our own word for them.
Oh, that's cute.
Because we had this squirrel that we used to feed nuts and stuff during the winter by our house. And so we called them kunchans. And so you get 24 squirrels in one kunchan. And the teacher goes, "Oh, it's squirrel. Say squirrel." And I sort of kunchan. Well, it may have been cute, but they then called my parents into the principal's office. This was in 1962, and said, you're going to hurt your son's chances of doing well in school if he keeps speaking that foreign language.
Oh, wow.
And so with that, my mom quit speaking as much. Of course, when I got in trouble, I heard a lot of Japanese, but in that sense, they almost made us illiterate in two languages for a little bit. And so in that way, I did have a very much a immigrant childhood, immigrant family childhood. My father, of course, in the military, and as I said, he went to Vietnam 3 times. He had 3 tours in Vietnam. So a lot of times I was raised with just my mom. And so, if you got sick and you needed to write an excuse note, my mom was not confident in her English, so she would ask us to write it, and then she would copy it over in her own handwriting, sign it, and then we send it in. So, it's a story of many immigrant kids who's come from bilingual families. As my mom got, though she spoke Japanese, English, and she had studied in school, and that's how she was working on base at Camp Zama. But again, sort of the confidence in your language, especially, with school and stuff. So that was part of our upbringing. But in 1960s, calling on the telephone, transpacific calls cost an enormous amount of money. There weren't a lot of commercial airplanes going back and forth. So the experiences that I see sort of the Japanese nationals today, where their kids can go back to Japan in the summers, they stay with their family, they go to school, they keep their language, that was really shut off to us.
I see.
We just did not have the income for that, and it just wasn't as available. There weren't, you couldn't turn on NHK on the television through cable television or stream anime on Prime, Prime Video or anything like that. So it pretty much isolated us with the language and lost a lot of it. My brother lost it completely.
Oh, I see. But I think it's wonderful how you stay connected to Japan. And I was going to mention that you're currently in Yokohama studying Japanese, right? Which is wonderful.
Yes. Well, at home, we were very much Japanese with Mom. So, coming into our home, shoes came off at the door. Grew up. I remember joking with Mom once when she gave us mashed potatoes, and I said, "What did I do wrong?" Because we had gohan at every meal, right? We had gohan and scrambled eggs or eggs in the breakfast, and then then onigiri at lunch, and our major starch at dinner was. So if we had mashed potatoes, I thought, oh man, I must have done something wrong.
That's so funny. I see. Okay. So, what would you say your identity was growing up when you moved around so much? Did you constantly have to rethink who you are vis-a-vis your community?
When you're a kid, it's a lot simpler than when you're an adult, right?
Hmm.
And so, um, certainly we grew up in the Black community in Manhattan, Kansas, surrounded by the Black community. But you went to school, and it was integrated. Um, my but my identity probably was more about my family and my big brother, because when we ended up traveling, it was just he and I. We got to know my father's family very well at that point. Our first stop was in Philadelphia, where we lived with his youngest brother and his family. And for that summer, as my paternal grandparents got ready to receive us down in North Carolina. And so that was a blast. Then we got to sort of live with my paternal grandparents in Wilmington, North Carolina. We lived in East Wilmington. This is the 1960s, right after the Civil Rights Act is passed, but that really didn't mean a whole lot in terms of everyday on the ground in North Carolina. It was highly segregated. They had taxis that were for black taxis, that were white taxis, and a white taxi wouldn't pick up a black person. Black taxis knew better than to pick up a white person. And so in that sense, the schools were still segregated. And for me, that turned out sort of in two different ways to be a benefit. One was the teacher that I got had been a friend of my father's. And so she recognized myself and another girl, her name was Deborah, and she differentiated and allowed us to accelerate as fast as we wanted to accelerate, whether it was in reading or in math or other things. And so that kept me from getting in trouble, because I think I would have been pretty bored otherwise. But at the same time, I learned in that time sort of the realities of the way race worked in the United States. When another teacher, somehow we got in this conversation, I said I was going to go to college. And she said to me, "Baby, don't think about that." And at the time, at least sort of my personality was, okay, you're telling me I can't do something, now I'm definitely going to do it.
Yeah.
But as I've sort of learned and studied race and other things, she was trying to protect me, because a lot of young men in Wilmington had gone to college. They got back from college. They went to most likely an HBCU, but they came back and they couldn't get jobs with their degrees, and they ended up being custodians and other stuff, and quite a few self-medicated. And so she was trying to save me from frustration, because her world that she had seen was that all these bright young men came back and they were extremely frustrated. Right. And I think, which is why I think my dad joined the Army, to get out, get away, do some other things. His older brother had been in the service during World War II, and he had heard stories about that. And I think that made it, and knowing my father, that gave him enough curiosity. And he was also, he read all the time. And so that was the gift he gave to me, and it's a gift that we've given to our daughter. But the time with my grandparents was really important in terms of understanding myself and what it meant to grow up as, in the United States, relative to blackness. The sort of one drop rule applied in the 60s, and it still applies today in a lot of different ways. But the community I was in was just, it was like being swaddled, right? This community really took care of us. I mean, my grandfather was a minister, carpenter by day, minister on the weekends. And so, we had sort of a middle class status in the Black community. I mean, not economically, but in sort of social status notions. So on the one hand, that meant you couldn't do anything wrong because anything you did got reported back to your grandmother before you
Right.
got home. But it also, you knew that you were cared for. You were protected, and there were people around who cared for you, and they cared enough for you to tell you when you were doing something that you shouldn't be doing to stop. And you never felt unsafe, at least in the Black community. Right? You have to understand at that time, there weren't a lot of places that were integrated, particularly in the South. And so even when we went to Texas the next year, San Antonio, Texas, it was segregated. The school that I went to in San Antonio were all Black and brown, so Blacks and Mexicans. My best friend was a Mexican kid, and we were two fastest runners in our class, so we formed a bond pretty quickly. But, in between North Carolina and Texas, we had stopped back in Kansas, so I was there for a semester. Kansas was integrated. Or at least Manhattan, Kansas was integrated. And so I went from being in an integrated setting to a segregated setting again. But I think as a kid, when you're 8 and 9 years old, it's sort of, we're playing foursquare, and could you compete in that, and baseball and track and choirs and all those sorts of things. And so, again, if you have good teachers, and we had really good teachers who cared about us, that just made, you didn't think about the bigger issues. Although you felt it, you knew what was going on, but it wasn't part of your everyday thinking. That would come when we got to junior high, when you get older and more cognitive. So.
Okay, got you. Well, would you mind talking about your junior high experience and how you overcame any struggles?
Well, I think, so junior high, so in the middle of 5th grade, we go to Okinawa. So what would now be middle school, right? I'm starting middle school. So I was there from the middle of 5th grade to the middle of 8th grade.
Okay.
Okinawa was a very important place for me in terms of identity and some other things. First, I think it was important because my mom was able to be in a situation where she could speak Japanese, even though they had a strong Okinawa bend, which I actually started learning. So she made sure I knew standard Tokyo. And so all the foods that she had grown up with were available to her. But for me, watching my mom, she was part of the NCO Wives Club, sort of clubs. And so she was teaching Japanese crafts and other things. My mom was a seamstress.
Wow.
And she took a Japanese doll making class, and she made a series of dolls that we still have. But for me as a kid to see your mom be fully herself, not that she wasn't, but in a different way, right?
Yeah.
She got to visit her sister a couple times. It was just, she was in a lot of ways just a different person. Not that she wasn't happy where she was, but, it's sort of, I think while she was there, she could breathe. And that was very evident. So for me to see my mom in that realm, right? She wasn't foreign anymore, right? There were more people who looked like her than didn't look like her the moment we stepped off base. And we spent a lot of our time my brother and I spent a lot of time off base. A lot of my friends were Okinawan and other folks their parents worked, so they got to play on our baseball teams and other things like that. And so this was during the Vietnam War, the height of the Vietnam War. So Okinawa, which was still U.S. territory, was completely mobilized to supporting the sort of aggression in Vietnam. And so Um, it was also important because being someone who could speak a little bit of Japanese or felt comfortable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it, whether I was on base or off base, I was home.
All right.
So
That
for
makes sense.
my only American friends, when we went off base, it was foreign to them,
Mm-hmm.
right? And for
Right.
my Asian American friends, Japanese American friends, when they were on base, people always thought they were not supposed to be there,
Mm.
right? And they would get questioned. So in some ways, I got to walk this place where I could be an arbitrator wherever I was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the other thing that happened then is again, this is 1968. The Black Power movement has come.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of all the sort of that those things were happening, and so, the black community went from, sort of you went from color to Negro to Afro American, and just different sort of trying to find the right sort of nomenclature.
Right, right.
And so I was fortunate to be in this program that was, I guess they called it a gifted program, but we had our own little study rooms, and so of course we're all sitting around acting like we know something. We've read the newspaper a bit, we've been watching the news. I said at one point, I wonder what I am, right? Because I was African American, or and one of my friends from Hawaii says, I know what you are, and I said, okay, what? He goes, you're Hapa Afro.
Mm.
Now, when you're 11 or 12 and you get a name
Mm.
that you feel fits you, and it's a powerful name,
Mm.
then for me, I was fortunate a lot of the other identity stuff that people wrestle with. I had something. Plus, I had parents who didn't shy away from the conversation. Um,
Great.
and and they one time when we were there, of course, this is Vietnam, so when you're around some of the sort of GIs and other things, and they would use the term gook.
Mm.
And one day I said something about gook at home,
Mm-hmm.
and my dad picks me up by the back of my neck. He was the first sergeant. My feet don't touch the ground. Takes me into the
Wow.
bathroom, and I'm dangling, right?
Mm.
And he's got my face in front of a mirror, and he's saying, "You want to see a gook? I'll show you a gook." Right? And he's got my face in the mirror. He says, because if they're a gook, then your mom's a gook. If your mom's gook, then you're a gook. So if I hear that again, you won't make it to your next birthday.
Oh my gosh.
So he was very clear that any kind of slang, slur, was not welcome in the house. Of course, the sort of N-word would have been completely out
Right.
at any of those other things. And so they didn't shy away from allowing us to be both and making sure we knew we were both. Okinawa is also, too, because we had so many other families. There were other Black Japanese families,
Mm-hmm.
and there were a lot of Hafu folks around. And so seeing Hafu was not strange.
Mm-hmm.
There was in social science we said there was a critical mass. And
Okay.
and
Makes sense.
and even though we didn't talk about it necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
there's that sense of knowing.
Mm-hmm.
And it also helped that a lot of my friends who were Asian American were from Hawaii.
Mm.
And so that just, all the Hafu stuff just made sense to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then my sort of white friends or American friends, they were cool with it. And so, I think part of that time period and that moment in history,
Mm-hmm.
because all of our dads were going in and out of Vietnam.
Mm.
They were either, even though we were stationed on Okinawa, people would get sent on TDY. They'd be gone for 6 weeks. You're not sure if they're coming back. My last year on Okinawa, my dad was actually stationed in Vietnam, and we got permission to stay on Okinawa because of for family reasons. And so we extended our stay. And I think for us as kids, when you have a parent that's constantly in harm's way or is going to be in harm's way, some of the other stuff just doesn't really matter. Even though, Martin Luther King gets assassinated, Bobby Kennedy gets assassinated, etc. And there's sort of the different uprisings that are happening. That for us, in a lot of ways, the color was camouflage green,
I
right?
see.
Because that was what bounded all of us together.
Thank you for that. That is so powerful, and I'm really touched by how open your family was in terms of talking about all these different identities. And it's so heartwarming to hear that you had this community of people who grew up in a similar environment or had similar family makeup and could be like a role model for you. That's really wonderful. And what you said about your color was camouflage green rather than black or white or Asian, I think that's such a powerful statement. Thank you for that. I wanted to move on just a bit to college, and we actually you're my senpai from Dartmouth, and I think it's really cool because you mentioned earlier how some people discouraged you from even thinking about college, and here you are, and you went to New England, which is a really different region, again, from all the places that you grew up in.
Right.
So I wanted to ask about that experience as well. How was that?
Dartmouth was my first choice. Um, the in the schools that I applied to, I played football in high school, and we had a really good football program. I played baseball. We had a pretty decent baseball program. I did pretty well in both of those sports. Was recruited in football. Got opportunities in baseball to try out for professional teams and some other things. And but I wanted a rural setting. I didn't want to be in the big city. I'd lived in a city before, both Philadelphia and San Antonio. So I wasn't in a hurry to go back to a city at that point. And so when I went up for my visit, it just felt right. It felt like a community. But having lived in so many different places, it was a new adventure. People have always asked me, well, you've lived so many places, where did you like best? And my answer is always where I was at the time. I learned to figure out what was good about where I was. I learned to try to avoid what was bad about where I was. If it's really cold there, then you get another coat. You get a coat that actually works. So I think, and I know it's not the same for all the kids who grew up in military families, but I think growing up in a bilingual, bicultural, international family that moved around and had to find community and make community continuously, we were able to be adaptable.
I see.
Dartmouth was interesting because in some ways I refound myself as Japanese.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember, but we had freshman dean when I was there. And Dean Ives, he met with every freshman one-on-one.
Wow.
And so my day came for my appointment, and we sat down, and Dean Ives and I are chatting a little bit, and he goes, have you ever thought about going to Japan for study abroad? I'm a first to go to college. Study abroad is not even in my vocabulary, let alone experience thoughts, right?
Yeah.
And he goes, because he said, I read your file. I said, you were born in Japan. Your mother's Japanese. You ever thought about going back to Japan? And I said, No, but that sounds interesting. He says, there's this, if you really think about it, there's this family in town, the Itagakis. You should reach out to them and talk to them. Because we didn't have a Japanese language program at Dartmouth at the time.
Oh, wow, okay.
And so, but that stuck with me my freshman year. Dartmouth, as you know, has a huge study abroad culture, right? The particularly the European languages. Almost everybody does a quarter someplace. Well, almost everybody a quarter by design, other than at Dartmouth. But and many of them are abroad. And so, as I started thinking about it, said, well, I decided I really wanted to go. And so in my sophomore year, I started looking into it. I don't even know how I found Sophia University, but I wrote to them and we exchanged letters, and next thing I know, they're accepting me. I meet the Itagakis and say, I'm gonna go to Sophia. My Japanese isn't very good. I haven't been able to use it. Could you help me? Can I come and sort of speak Japanese with you, do lessons with you and stuff? And this Itagaki says, I tell you what, why don't you just move in with us?
Wow.
For my junior fall, because I play football, so I'm not going any place in the fall. And I said, really? And so, because their oldest son was my age, so he and he was going to Yale. They had the younger brother and the daughter. She's the youngest in the family, are still there. They're in high school. And so I said, okay. And I move into Haruhiko's room. So he said, I'm sleeping in his bedroom. Their Mr. Itagaki's father is living with them, Ji-chan. Ji-chan speaks absolutely no English. And my job after dinner was to entertain Ji-chan.
Aw, that's so cute.
And so Ji-chan would sit me down, and he taught me to play Go. Now,
oh, wow.
If they had a reality TV video camera sort of doing that, it must have been hilarious. He's trying to teach. So he sort of teaches me to play Go, and then he whips my tail every night.
Aww.
So we play, and and he's older, so his Japanese mumbled, And so
right.
I think even if I spoke Japanese, I wouldn't be able to understand him. I was fluent. But we had our way of hanging out together, and then he'd whip my tail, and then he'd do that sort of Ji-chan chuckle and shuffle off to bed.
Aww,
But
so
that
cute.
was our nightly routine. And so, we had sort of traditional Japanese food all the Itagaki made sure that I got used to what the food would be like and other things.
Right.
They got to come to football games that they never went to.
Oh, nice.
And they became football fans. But no, it was that sort of their acceptance of me that allowed me to have a lot of confidence. And then when I went to Japan, my family in Japan, who I hadn't seen since I was little, had already found a place for me to stay in Higashijujo, which would be closer to Sophia, because they lived out in Shibaken and Abiko. And so they thought that would just be too long of a commute because they didn't have as many express trains as they do now. This is in 1978. So they did that. And then my uncle meets me at the airport, my mom's older brother. But, I tell this to my classes about how sort of language and culture and the way in which sort of primary reference, all those sorts of things, and where ego centered. In Japanese language, in your family, oftentimes you don't go by a name, you go by your birth order where you are. And so for my mom, her brother was always Nichan. And so my brother and I, putting that together, said Uncle Nichan. And for our entire lives, we called him Uncle Nichan.
Oh, that's cute.
So I'm getting
Oh.
ready to go to Japan. So mom's, so she's all excited. She's
Mm.
got, you know, and so she gives me this card, and it has a name on it. She has Japanese writing on it. Then she
Mm.
has Romoji. And
Mm.
so I read the Romoji, and it goes, Kenzo. I said, who's Kenzo?
Oh my gosh.
She goes, oh, that's your Uncle Nichan. I said, you mean his name isn't Nichan? Ah, um,
That's so cute.
but he's there to meet me at the airport, and with a cousin. This cousin I
Mm.
didn't know I had. And I get set up in Higashi Jujo. So during college, I get to have this whole experience in Japan that's just me. I mean, I go to visit my family a couple times a month, but
Mm.
I'm living independently from them. So Japan really becomes my own place at that time.
Mm.
And it becomes home, and it still is home. I'm
Mhm.
blessed with having more than one home, but when I come here, I feel comfortable.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and in a lot of ways it's effortless, and in other ways it's a lot of work. But I think the Dartmouth experience, which was so encouraging of going abroad,
Mm.
um, they made it financially feasible for me to do it. Um, and so Dartmouth is Dartmouth can be very difficult because of its isolation.
Mm.
It was a very interesting place in terms of identity, um, because I really began to experience how race worked.
Mm.
Um, Not that I hadn't in Kansas, but not necessarily in the same way. Manhattan, while it's a university town, is a little more progressive, but
Mhm.
also it's a small town, and I had a I had a classic all-American mom and apple pie high school. I
Mm.
sang in show choir. I was on the football team. I played baseball. I was in the musical. I was, it's, it was, uh, had friends from all different backgrounds. Um, some parents wouldn't let me date their daughters, but
Mm.
that was fine too. You found workarounds and those sorts of things, right?
Mhm.
Um, so there were some frustrations about that, but culturally, you know, Okinawan had sort of put the Japanese in me very clearly. At home,
Mm.
mom and I could be who we were. I think more of my struggles came, or more of the challenges came after I left. There's things that happened in college that were specific more to being black than they were to being Japanese.
I see.
Because, for me, when United States, the one drop rule really sort of applies. Like that I was Japanese didn't matter to some people.
Interesting. Okay.
That I was black did, right?
Mm. Okay.
Um, and um, so I think, ironically, because of the places, when I left college, I went to State College, Pennsylvania, where I coached at Penn State, and then
Mm.
ended up going back to Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, getting my master's in public policy,
Mhm.
coaching football and track there, and then beginning to work in the Dean of Students office. Came to California to Pomona College, where I was eventually Associate Dean of Students and Dean of Residential Life and Student Affairs, and that's where I thought my career was going to be.
Mhm.
But it's when I got to California with all this diverse populations that things started flying off the walls.
Mm.
Um, and in part, I think, sort of you can talk about historically with competition between the different groups and the way in which they pit each group against each other. But
Mhm.
there were times when people wanted me to choose sides, and I just wouldn't.
Right.
And that just wasn't going to happen. And that's when a number of us sort of bumped into each other again.
Mm.
And in the early 80s, we started the Amerasia League, and which was a really interesting thing. We thought about the name for about 4 days. We were trying to sort of figure out how to organize ourselves. And there were started doing, people would, sort of Christine Ijima Hall did her dissertation on Black Japanese at UCLA around that time. Michael Thornton did his dissertation in sociology on Black Japanese family. Stephen Murphy Shikamatsu did his work in sort of individual therapy, and George Kitch. And so these 4 major dissertations are published right around that time. And people began to start to do work in the expressive forms. Amy Hill, other folks, and of course, Felina Hasse Houston and her plays were rolling out at that time. Her first play, one of her, I think is, for me, her strongest play is Asagaki Mashita, a story about her parents meeting in Japan.
I see.
But T comes out, wins international awards. And so and Felina Houston and her sister Rika, we had known each other. A number of us ended up in Los Angeles, and so we sort of pulled together and started doing some other work on mixed race. And that's when some of the, in the Japanese American community in the 60s and early 70s, there were a lot of interracial marriages that were happening. And so just about this time, their kids are starting to become teenagers, and their questions about identity are coming up, and, as they're getting older. And so in the 80s and 90s, there's all these panels on interracial families, interracial dating, interracial this, interracial that. And so we were doing all these panels. I did panels all over the state on interracial relationships and mixed race, and sort of mixed race kids, because the parents didn't know what to do, right? They weren't sure how to sort of navigate this, and so there's this group of us who were in our sort of 30s and 40s who, from the sort of the war baby kids, who'd grown up and were putting time and effort into sort of really thinking about this. What does this mean? How can we understand ourselves? How do we talk about ourselves? How do we understand our families? And again, we had sort of the academics that come out of it that started. And so we spent a lot. I did much more in public education and spent a lot of time doing talks at different places and smaller groups and those sorts of things. First to say, whatever you're dealing with is real, and it's legitimate, and I would even argue there's some righteousness in there, and so it was a really interesting and important time. The multiracial movement sort of catches fire in the 90s, going into the 2000s, and then we ended up with the census change in 2000. Hop Issue Forum is formed, at Berkeley, but there's sort of a glass bottom to that boat, right? In some ways, because what came out is the thought that we had erased racism going into the 2000s, and I can still remember teaching ethnic studies in 2012 and having students telling me that the stuff that I was teaching was just old and people didn't think that way anymore. And Obama had been elected twice, and some of those same students were crying in my office in 2016.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But, luckily I did not grow up in a bubble, right? The West Coast can be its own bubble, right? To this day, when someone in Japan asks me sort of, about American culture and start talking about, I refer them to Zach Brown, the Zach Brown band's Chicken Fried. If you want to really understand Middle America,
Mm-hmm.
it's not complicated, and it's wholesome, and unfortunately, it can be led in some bad directions. But the lyrics to that sounds like want a beer on Friday night, a pair of jeans that fit just right, a mom that loves them, and a wife too, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
it's not a complicated existence, and I think that's just fine. I think sometimes in academia and in other places, right, we can intellectualize things so heavily
Mm-hmm.
that we lose our ability to talk to people who don't want overly complicated lives.
Right, right.
Um,
That makes sense.
and so, um, I grew up. My father was a first sergeant, so mom was a seamstress. We didn't have a lot of money, and I worked all the time. My brother worked all the time. Um, I worked cleaning bathrooms and shining shoes and other things like that, and bussing tables at the country club with my schoolmates' parents and families, eating their dinners, and
Yeah.
so I understand. I understand that sometimes we have to be able to communicate things.
Um, so you said that you were the first to go to college. I'm just curious how you ended up deciding that you wanted to, yeah, obtain a PhD and join academia.
Purely out of it, it's an accident. I'm an
Okay.
accidental
Mm,
global scholar, as they say.
mm,
I went to college with the intention of probably going to law school or working at a bank.
okay.
Um, I did my economics degree because we didn't have a business degree at Dartmouth.
Mm, mm,
Found out I actually liked it. Um, Double major with Asian studies, but my Asian studies was Japanese and Chinese culture as seen through vernacular literature and theater and translation.
interesting.
So, and my and the economics was more money and banking, and so more so both left and right sides of my brain were fed.
Mm,
Did my master's in public policy. When I went to Trinity College as a football coach, and part of the deal in bringing me there said, you can get your master's. And I knew that even if I was going to stay in football coaching, which is what I intended to do, you really needed another degree. Public policy was interesting to me. I'd done some policy, of course, the economics, and this program was economics based. And Professor Andrew Gold in the econ department was really fantastic. And so it was it's serendipity in a lot of different ways.
mm,
But it fit for me.
okay.
It allowed me to teach ethnicity and public policy. And so looking at the way in which public policy dealt, sort of, it was before I had understood ethnic studies as ethnic studies, I knew that there was ways to talk about it. And I got to teach that seminar at Pomona College while I was where I went as sort of associate dean, became an associate dean of students and dean of residential life. So I wanted to get my PhD because I wanted my boss's job.
Okay.
he had a PhD and I think he was an organic chemist. So I ended up
Mhm,
applying to Berkeley in their ethnic studies department
mm,
and to UC Irvine's comparative culture program, and then some poli-sci programs like at Fordham, American Cultures at Yale, some other stuff like that, right?
mhm,
The only reason I applied for Irvine, I had written a letter of recommendation for one of my RAs
mm.
2 years earlier, and I thought, this sounds like an interesting place. So I'm probably, because I read about it so I could write the letter of
Mhm.
recommendation.
Right, right.
And
Mhm,
so I apply, and they give me hands down the best um, financial packet.
Mm.
I got a 2 year guaranteed fellowship with housing
Wow.
and monthly stipend and other things. So I go in early because I have housing, and so I go in and I run into this professor, Joe Jorgensen,
Mhm.
and our comparative culture program is a really small
Mhm.
boutique thing, and we have our own computer room, right?
Wow.
So other large departments don't even have their own. We have our own computer because um, so Joe's sitting there and he's working on something, and he was doing some multidimensional scaling and small space analysis.
Mhm.
Um, he's a culture anthropologist who does mathematical ethnography.
Mm.
So I come in and I sit down and he's working on something, and so start to chat. So then he says, "Hey, come take a look at this." And he shows me that he's doing this work in 3 dimensions, and he's
Mm.
got these variables, um, and what looks like they're close together in 2 dimensions, when you get into the third dimensions, they really are further apart. And all of a
Mm.
sudden, the the quantitative stuff from econ and the qualitative stuff from Asian studies came together,
Mm.
and it made sense.
Mhm.
And so that's how I ended up doing my work in Alaska on Asian American communities up there. I mean, it's a little more involved than that, but it was just the methodology, and then being able to use be able to do the quantitative arguments in such a way that you could do that to bring social justice communities who were marginalized, and doing the kind of empirical work that would hold up in court became really important. So while I was there, Exxon Valdez ran aground, and the oil spill that resulted in Alaska. And so
Mm.
I came onto a team, and I had already been working on that team that had pre-spill data. And I
Mm.
spent the next 2 or 3 years, 4 years running around Alaska, first on that project and then on my own. By that time, um, I hadn't planned to do as much work in mixed race because I didn't want to be pigeonholed as a mixed race guy.
I see.
Um, but then some of the sort of practical realities of sort of the academic market, and then sort
Mhm.
of recognizing that that wasn't something that was a negative or that could hold me back, but it was a particular role and niche I could fill.
Yeah.
And then as I started to teach those classes, the number of mixed race students who started taking those classes, right,
Mhm.
just said, even though you hadn't set out to do this, it's a good thing you are.
Mhm. Mhm.
um, and um, and even when I've taught in Japan, I teach a course called Mixed Roots,
Mm.
that looks at both mixed race and third culture, for Japanese, sort of returnees.
Mhm.
Um, Not much like yourself, who grew up someplace else, come back to Japan. They're fluent in
Mhm.
Japanese, but it doesn't quite fit. And
Mhm.
how do they make sense of this, right?
Right.
Um, and so those were always my almost over enrolled classes, um,
Okay.
as people are
Wow.
trying to sort those things out. But the mixed race stuff is important because
Mhm.
I think it's important more than identity. Um, because if in sort of understanding mixed race, you can understand power. If you can understand power and how
Okay.
power works, you can work to dismantle power.
Mhm. That makes
So
sense. Yeah.
when it's not being used to bring people together, right? When
Mhm.
it's being used to divide, if you understand how it works, you can work to dismantle that.
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you so much for that. And I also wanted to ask about various terminology before we go in a little bit more about the current situation, because
Hmm.
you mentioned how Black people are called has changed over time,
Hmm.
and I was also wondering about Hapa, and you also mentioned Hafu, but I also understand that there's some controversy about you're not either or, and also you shouldn't sound like you're less than whole. And I understand some people are trying to push double and things like that. Would you mind talking a little bit about these different terminology?
Sure. You know, I was fortunate to be one of the people interviewed in a movie called Doubles,
Mm,
Japan and America's Intercultural Children, by Reggie Life. And I toured a little bit with Reggie when the film came out. Um, and I think at that moment it sort of made sense, and it made sense particularly in Japan. Maya Moore was NHK newscaster, so she had a platform.
mm,
She was able to say to, I think in that particular moment, being hafu was derogatory, and as Japan was coming out of the bubble and the bubble burst and other things, and when economics get tight, so do people's ideas and openness, right? And I think she was trying to give folks like herself, and particularly kids, an opportunity to have something that they could hold on, a name that they could be, that you're not half of anything, you're double, right?
mm,
Um, that hasn't necessarily, or double, but it hasn't necessarily stuck. And
mm,
then, in uh, the late 20 teens, um, you know, Hafu comes back. But this time, it's sort of like blackness in the United States, right? So
mm.
when my dad was growing up and when I was a kid, black was a derogatory, right?
Yeah.
I'm not black, I'm Negro, right? Which was a term at the time. And so,
Mm,
um, but in the mid 60s and into the sort of 68, 69, and into the 70s, they reappropriated blackness.
mhm,
And black is beautiful.
mhm.
Natural. That's when the Afro came out. The natural, those sorts of things. We sort of lean back on our sort of traditions of oral traditions, and sort of some of the first spoken word was written back then, right? So, but when they did that in Japan, it was sort of, we're just going to take this term back. We're tired of people defining us. We're going to define ourselves.
Right.
And um, people will use Hafu, but we don't have to use their definition of knowing who we are.
Mhm,
And so I think in that sense, Hafu in Japan has for this generation, I won't say for everyone, but for this generation, right? And not everyone in the generation, but it has become a sort of uh, a self-naming that provides power. Um, I think within that time frame, Ayana Miyamoto is crowned Miss
mhm,
Japan.
mhm.
Part of Japan loses its mind. But the kids growing up, like I said, kids only see what they see. And she was Miss Japan.
Right.
So for that 8-year-old girl, that 9-year-old girl, she was Miss Japan. A number of years later, Naomi Osaka is the most famous Japanese person in the world for our time.
Right.
The
Mhm.
only Asian woman to ever hold number one. Um, uh, Inouye, and then of course the Olympics are just all like Hafu from all over the world show up.
Mhm.
Having a name can be very
Yeah.
important, and
Mhm.
it needs to be a name you give yourself.
Mhm.
I know that there's a lot of controversy with the word Hapa, and
Mhm.
for a lot of good reasons, and sort of colonization and all the different
Yeah.
things and what that represents from Hawaii. Um, for me, you know, it um, having the term, when my friend Glenn Asumi says, "I know what you are. You're Hapa Afro."
Mhm.
it allowed a lot of the other stuff to just not be as important.
I see.
Because I named myself. I don't use Hapa very much anymore because I want to respect the Native Hawaiians.
Mm-hmm.
But I would never say to someone who's using it, particularly in the way that they need to at that moment in their life, that they shouldn't. I've come to talk about being mixed as just being a different normal. I talk about it as a different normal because so much of the literature and other stuff talks about being abnormal or not normal or any of those other things. Mm-hmm. And if you look at normal, right, in definition in the dictionary, right, we can't be anything other than we're as mixed. Mm-hmm. It's a state of being. That's my different normal. And so from the time I was in utero and could start to sense the outside world, the way my mom moved, the way my dad moved, the tones of voice, all those different things were part of my consciousness. They were always more than one.
Right.
When I came out and I could start to see, my father was a different skin tone than my mother was. My mother spoke a different language than my father spoke. My brother, right? So as a 3-year-old, and I went to someone else's house where the two parents looked the same, they spoke the same language, I'm thinking, what's wrong with this family? They're not normal.
Right. Of course.
Right?
Wow. Mm-hmm.
So taking it from a toddler's viewpoint, my house is normal. Every now and then people want to bring up, sort of divorce rates and other things. I said, well, if we talk about the United States, divorce rate across the board is above 50%. Nobody in the United States knows how to do marriage, right? Are you kidding me? Mm-hmm. So you can't single out this group and say, right? So it, I can get very sort of cranked up, but I think that to understand that we live a different normal, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we can define our normal. We can talk about our normal. I had a chance to talk to 5th graders here in Japan when I was teaching at Sophia. It was the year. Someone at the embassy who's African American, married to Japanese. Daughter was in this 5th grade class, and they were doing stuff on diversity. I've given lots of talks. I don't think I've slept worse. I've lost more sleep getting ready for that talk than any of 5th graders. Well, number one, I can't use a PowerPoint. I can't. And how am I supposed to talk about these really sort of complex things too, right? And so, and I've been invited in by somebody's child who's Black Japanese. Like, oh, it's like all this pressure. But that's when I started thinking about this notion of different normal more fully. Because with those 5th graders, I started out the conversations. Somebody define normal for
me. That's a hard one.
And they were able to talk about normal. And they were said. So then I said, you know what the mainstream is when somebody talks about mainstream? And they said, I know. I said, okay. You know when you go to Meiji Jingu, Meiji Temple, there's that one major way that you go down where almost everybody goes down with the sort of sake barrels and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
That's the mainstream. Almost everyone travels that stream. But if you go off to the sides, there's these really interesting trails and places to go because I would go walking there in the mornings and other stuff, right? That's outside the mainstream. But they all bring you to the temple. So that's the different normal I'm talking about.
That's a great way to put it. I love it.
And so, what was most rewarding about that day was all the Hafu kids. When we first started, they're kind of by the end of the talk, they were,
Oh my gosh.
right?
Yeah.
Because somebody who understood them, or at least had the possibility of understanding them, just talked about their lives in a way that the other kids listened.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was, who knows what that meant for them going on, but in that moment, they weren't ashamed of being mixed.
Right.
And so I think Switch made me, and I'm still working on developing the notion of different normal, but I think having a name, having a way to understand ourselves, having the language to talk about ourselves, right? Students in my classes, when they would come in who are mixed white, would talk about, sort of, I'm white passing. I would look at them and go, explain that to me a little bit more.
Right.
And these were folks who were engaged in sort of various, whether they were white, Mexican, white, and black, they were involved in the black community, the Latino community, the Asian community. And I said, you're white appearing, and you get passed as white, but I don't think you're white passing. To give them a language to talk about these things that's complex, right? And even now, sort of, but you see this other thing that picks up. We have Wasian, we have Blasian, we have, I think Blasian came first actually, but we have, Blackanese, other things, right? And while sometimes if we sort of pick it apart, it can be a little bit problematic or cheesy, but if it helps a 12-year-old kid not want to dislike themselves, I'm down. I mean, I'm gonna let that 12-year-old kid use that if they're 21 and it keeps them from wanting to kill themselves or being suicidal, suicide ideology, or just not like themselves. Then I'm all for it. Even if it's not something that I would particularly use. Because I think, Maria Root's right. Our job sometimes, and she's a clinical psychologist, I need to get my client, my patient, to the next day. We can work out the other stuff as we go along. But if we don't get to tomorrow, we can't work on the rest. So what's going to help you get to tomorrow, I think, is fully legitimate for you today. It may not be as healthy for you a year from now, and that's why I'm here. But if it gets you to tomorrow, we're good. So in that way, I'm very practical about stuff. I can be very theoretical, but theory doesn't necessarily help when someone's in a great deal of pain.
Yeah. That is such a beautiful way to put it, and I'm tearing up because it's wonderful how you look at it from a psychological perspective too. I understand that you do. That's part of your work as well, and it's so helpful. Just for me talking to you about it. And related to that, I wanted to talk about how we should deal with the current situation. And first, I think it's amazing how you continue to do student exchange, because I also know that from an academic institution perspective, from a funding perspective, that's really hard. And also, you're working with all this, talking to people about diversity when even the term DEI is under attack, and it must be so hard. How do you keep going, and how do you encourage people who are struggling with this identity issue?
Well, I think one of the reasons I can keep going is I think young folks are just amazing. They just are. I'm in my late 60s, and every now and then people my age will go, I don't know about it. These young people are, all I can say is you've not spent a whole lot of time with young people. Because I think even with all the challenges and struggles, and that doesn't mean I don't have my complaints either, but but they want better. They want to not be divided. Even those who seem to want to be divided, if you really get down beneath the underneath, they just want to be seen. And in different ways, they've been made to feel like they aren't seen. And so I think that part becomes important. One of the things I've really enjoyed about doing the exchanges, I work on a sort of international leadership program in which there's an academic component to it. But it's really about being international leaders. And I use international rather than global because if you're in a leadership position, then you need to deal with laws, policies, other structures that are real, right? Because I also believe that the human part of it, once you get young people together, the sort of global part, that will take care of itself. But they're going to have to lead in a world of laws, policies, regulations, those sorts of things. And so how do you get to sort of working on those things? That said, I've been fortunate. I'm part of the U.S.-Japan Council, which is an organization comprised predominantly of Japanese Americans in leadership positions that work in U.S.-Japan relations. That was founded by Irene Hirano and Senator Daniel Inouye. I'm wearing the TOMODACHI Inouye Scholars Program
Thank you
logo
for that.
that one of our students designed.
Wow.
So for LMU's program, and so I was fortunate to receive 4 grants over 10 years to take different groups of students to Japan and also host students from Japan in Los Angeles. And so my program has focused on communities that have been historically underrepresented. I wanted to give them another identity as well as Tomodachi Inouye scholars, which meant they have responsibilities back to the campus, they have responsibilities back to our own communities to take those experiences with them and hope that the relationships they made with the students from Sophia University, which is the one that we've always partnered with. For me, the program helps bring me full circle because Sophia University is the one that took me in as a college junior. It was an exchange program. I wrote them and said, we don't have an exchange. I want to come. Can we make this work? And they said, yes, we will make it work. And so that's been a really special connection for me, and it still is, and I still do institutional work with Sophia. But I think what's been important is that our students, in the way that we approach it, they learn a lot about Japanese culture, but that's not the center of our. It's not the center of our teaching.
Right.
What's at the center of teacher is how do we fully see the other? If you're going to be an incredible leader, if you're going to be the leader you want to be, you have to first learn to listen. And then you have to first learn to see. And then to be able to be vulnerable and share. When you're talking cross-culturally, to me, that's where it begins. That's where it starts. And in that process, you'll learn so much more about yourself. Right? And so we've had students who had never been on a plane before as part of that program. Several we had to make sure we had to get passports for. or work with them to get their passports. Um, we we've done homestay as part of that. And we've had some students who never stayed at someone else's house that wasn't a relative. I've been able to have colleagues and relationships here with different entities in Japan, so that our students again, probably 50% have been first to go.
Wow.
So that they can see other possibilities. We had a wonderful panel with a group from the U.S. Embassy of folks of color who worked in the State Department there, and they did a program for us and talked about how they came to work in the State Department. And just like me, it was all accident. Only a couple people had, the one who organized it, he had planned it. The rest of them had and found themselves there, which was really refreshing for our students, and say, what they said, luck is when preparation meets opportunity.
Oh,
So continue to prepare yourself and see what opportunities come, and don't close the door to anything. We've been fortunate that through the generosity of a donor, I'll be able to do this program for the next 4 years. But we're going to sort of shift it a little bit. It's now called Tomogu.
okay.
So I forget the Korean word for friend, but we put the two words together. It's Tomo and Gu.
I see.
Tomodachi and
okay.
Gu. So Tomogu.
Nice.
So we'll spend 6 to 7 days in Japan and around 6 to 7 days in Korea.
Oh, that's lovely.
But looking at where those intersected, right, and both in terms of challenge and reward, we're planning to sort of make sure we do Hiroshima. I think for our students, it's always been a very important thing to visit Hiroshima. But we also, in doing so, we go to the memorial for the Koreans who were in Hiroshima at the time. That was Japanese and others, and so, and in that program too, we spend time with learning about Murakami, Ainu.
Okay.
So sort of understanding sort of there's a richness, right? I tend to think of DEI as about, because I was doing DEI before they called it DEI, but there's a richness. There's a vibrant richness, a robust richness to the variety of ways in which people sort of engage with the world and see themselves in relationship to it. And if we open ourselves up to that richness, we can grow incredibly. And I think even when it's, I was talking to someone the other day, even when it's mendakusai or a little bit troublesome,
Yeah.
but it's an interesting, and as long as you can allow it to be interesting, then it's an interesting mendakusai.
Interesting, mendokusai. I love that.
Right? As opposed to something to be afraid of. Right? Usually we think things that are different, we take it with fear. That fear gets engaged in that. We don't know, we're not sure, all those different things, right? And I think from the American cultural perspective and sort of American academics, we respect things we can understand.
Yep.
And that's not the way life works. They're experiences that you have as a woman. I can theorize about it, I can read about it, but I'm never going to know or understand it fully. But that doesn't mean I can't respect it.
Right.
Right?
Makes sense.
My life growing up as someone who's mixed, I think the third cultures kids and transracial adopted kids are probably ones that are closest. And we share a lot of overlapping Venn diagram there, but each have their own uniqueness that will never that again, I think it's important that we respect other people's experiences, but I don't have to understand it. I may come to better knowledge and and understanding about it, but I will never understand it, and that's okay. But Western notions of education and sort of the rational scientific model really pushes us to understand everything, and when we can understand it, we can respect it. I think Western education has gotten us a lot of stuff, and I really believe in it. I make a living in it, and that doesn't mean, and it's taught me, that doesn't mean it can't be critiqued. And the thing that I would critique is you can respect without understanding. And when we're talking about people, that's important. And the other piece of it is we then also have to have a little, I'll use a Christian term, grace, but a sense of forgiveness, because if we all knew how to do it in terms of working together and all those different things, we'd be doing it. But obviously we don't.
Right.
So if someone is working hard toward it, they're going to say something offensive. They're going to say something wrong. They're going, you're saying you worry about what term to use because you don't want to hurt anyone. Now, if someone's coming from the pureness and goodness and they say something that can be extremely offensive, we can either jump down their throat, right? On occasions you do need to, I'm not saying, but or we can understand it as they've been taught very well by our society in different ways. How do we get them to a conversation to unteach it? Other times you have that conversation is by being who you are. One of my best friends from Manhattan, Kansas, ended up working for a Japanese company for most of his adult life. He became the president of their company in the U.S.
Wow.
And so, actually, he was here in Tokyo, we were running around together. And so I asked him about sort of what role my mom might have played. And what he said was, it wasn't that it was positive and it sort of not was instrumental in the sense that it made me want to go out and look for something Japanese.
Yeah.
But when the opportunity came, he wasn't afraid of it. I remember when he first took the job, every month we were on the phone. He's going, "They're doing this. What does this mean? What should I do?" Just trying to get cultural cues.
Yeah.
But he wasn't afraid, right? That's what I mean by sort of that sense of how do we make each other not afraid of one another, right? And that takes a little grace on our part. Because I have this belief that most people want to do good by others. I think everyone has a gift of some sort, and if we engage that gift in ourselves, and we nurture that gift in others, whatever their gift is, then we have a chance. But it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be smooth, perfectly smooth, and life would be boring if it was. But I believe that first we have to be able to hear, though. Right?
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. That's really sage advice. And I really appreciate how you really explain the difference between respect and understand. I think you're absolutely right. I think we try to understand each other first in the most logical way, whereas with respect, it needs to be approached from a more emotional and personal way with in terms of like one-on-one relations. I was wondering if I could ask once again, one last time, if you have any advice who are with people who are struggling with choosing like where to be based and what sort of a career they want to have because they feel pulled in all these different directions because of their identity. Um, and especially because you mentioned how it's really important to be seen, not only for yourself, but also to have people not be afraid of your own community. Because I
Hmm.
feel like a lot of people struggle with confidence when
Right.
they hold these multiple identities because they don't feel like they belong to a certain community, the majority community or the more mainstream minority.
Right.
And so they feel like they need to stay small and not be seen, whereas it's more
Hmm.
important to be seen. So I was wondering where you start that like positive cycle of giving yourself confidence, going out there
Yeah.
and things like that.
I was had the privilege of having a conversation with on tape with Naomi Osaka. Um, but when the camera
It's
wasn't
wonderful.
rolling, we were chatting,
Hmm.
um, and then it got cut. We did have it on camera. Was that being multiple was? She said that's my superpower.
Mm,
I think the world wants to tell us when we're multiple that we aren't a single thing, and particularly in this particular era in which our lives are ruled by zeros and ones, right?
mhm,
Computer coding is all binary. AI is still binary. It's right.
mhm,
We live in a science-based either-or world, ones or zeros.
mhm,
But humans are more complex than that. We're so often both and.
mhm,
Our societies, whether it's Japanese society or US society, wants us to be a one something.
mhm, mhm,
And so when you are more than one, the discourse wants you to feel like you're duplicitous.
right.
And I would say to you, that's your superpower. That's one of your gifts. Does it? You have the opportunity to understand. You
Mhm,
have to hone it. You have to work at it. You have to do some other things. You have the ability to be respected. All those different things. And it's okay that you aren't a one. It took me a long time for me to even get to some of that for myself, right? I mean, it
mhm,
really did, because um, I'm in a profession where we have people who are singular expert on a singular thing, that they are one of the top 5 people in the world on this thing.
mhm,
I can't do that. I couldn't, for me personally, it just, right?
mhm,
And, and, and I recognize I can do a lot of things reasonably well.
mhm,
Um, but what I am really good at is synthesis, to be able to see systems and pull these things together and be able to take all these different pieces and make them fit.
mhm.
I don't think I could do that if I wasn't multiple,
That makes sense.
right? Those of us who've grown up with the multiple lives, we have had to decode systems, see where there's synergy among the systems, where they're completely different. We have to ask the question, who am I?
Mm,
And take all the different multiples and saying, given these, who am I?
mm,
as we start to sort that out, we can start to recognize in some ways, whose am I? To what are the sort of larger groups that I belong and don't belong or are part of, and how do I see myself, whether it's my family, whether it's, you know, and I like what Stephen Murphy says. The only person who gets to decide how Japanese I am is me.
It's true.
Right? And it's okay to privilege one over the other in a given moment. Right?
Yeah.
I'm in Japan. I privilege my Japaneseness right now. And sometimes being in Japan, I actually am able to explore and understand my Blackness better than I can in the States. But when I'm in the Black community, when I'm in a Black community in the States, I probably privilege my Blackness because speaking Japanese isn't going to help me. I mean, if you think of it, you know, sort of using language as a thing, right? If I'm in the setting, using the language that's appropriate for that setting helps me to meet other people's needs and get my own needs met. That doesn't mean I don't know the other language.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
So in this case, I'm talking cultural language, but also language, right? Spoken language. But like I said, all the work says society wants us to feel bad about moving around and not being in the same place all the time.
Right.
And that's just not possible for us. I don't think it's possible for anyone, really, if they really sort of broke it down.
Right.
You know, the role you play as a daughter is different than the role you play as a partner. That's different than the role that you play as a friend is different than the role. We all sort of move through these spaces and privilege those roles in moments that need to be privileged, right? And the other thing is that wherever we find ourselves in today, we don't have to be in that same place tomorrow. That you know, in the work that Rika Houston and what's that? I can't remember the last time she did the work with an anthropologist, but you know, being mixed is about sort of being comfortable with and embracing fluidity, right? To be able to move back and forth and through and across and around the various things that make us up, right? That you and I can speak in Japanese and intersperse English words into code switch in the middle of the sentence and keep moving. And to a purist in either language, they might not like it, but boy, it sure helps us it allows us to get our needs met. It allows us to meet other people's needs.
Right.
You know? So in that sense, I like to say nobody ever lives at the mean. So it's okay that we don't either. We just have multiple means that we get to run around.
Right.
And that's, you know, that part is you have to sort of, you have to come to some comfort with yourself.
Okay.
Right? And my mom once put it, yeah, if you don't love yourself, how can anybody else? Mom was kind of straightforward sometimes. Then when I got too stuck on something, she goes, you know, the sun's coming up tomorrow. It's like, okay.
She's so wise.
Yeah, she got me out of my own head. But I think that's part of it. We have to get out of our own head. But what helps that is to try to identify people who want. I've been blessed because I've had people want want more for me than I sometimes want it for myself.
Mm.
They wanted success more for me than I wanted it sometimes, that I even knew for myself. There are people out there that will serve that for you, whether it's your peers or someone who's a little bit older, or someone who's younger. It's not always the older. I get more inspiration. I think I get as much inspiration from folks like you who are younger than I am than I do from people. Well, of course, there's not that many people older than me now, but from folks who are older, right? Because I think y'all see possibilities that sometimes we're too jaded to see. But I think that's where having folks that you can trust. But that's not easy to find, and who will be honest with you. But the challenge when you're mixed, are you in these sort of liminal communities or liminal spaces? What helps me is that I do have a community of people with whom I inhabit these liminal spaces. Right? We found each other in the early mid 80s. So some of those folks are still a part of my life. They're still an important part of my life, whether it's Stephen Murphy Shigematsu or Teresa Williams or Felina Houston or Rika Houston, or I can list Maria Root. I can list a lot of others, right? Or the next generation with, sort of Maya Washington and Wendy Thompson, and who do work on Black, Asian, and Lillian Welty Tamai, who does some incredible work. So, there's, within that realm, those are folks that I find, and there's the folks who are doing the community work as well. And not always necessarily mixed, like the women from Women's Eye, Megumi Ishimoto here in Japan, and the work they do in Women's Eye, and Michiko Kurabayashi, and all the folks that are there, right? Finding folks who are doing work that work for others, I think that's what grounds me. And so, and there's just some incredible people out there who do amazing things. And I think the other time, sometimes you just have to take a chance. My third cousin in Inouye, I went up to his door, and I had the person who's helped me translate, knocked on the door and said, "I think I'm your cousin." We found
Wow.
And pulling out the koseki, sure enough we were, and we began a conversation. But that was scary, I think, for both of us. Something I hope will come out in Discover Nikkei this year.
Nice. Okay.
And then my cousins here in Yokohama, the second cousins, left a note in the mailbox because we got the address. Didn't hear anything for about 3 or 4 months, and then we did, and we got back together. And we got together, and we're able to hakamairi, and because we shared great-great-grandfather, and our grandfathers were brothers. And I just had lunch with them in Chinatown yesterday.
Oh, nice.
And one of them said to me, our lives have been so busy that even though we're cousins, we rarely get together. And now that you've come, we've seen each other more in the last 2 years than we have in the last 10, basically.
Oh, that's great.
But boy, was it scary. for me to reach out, right?
Hmm.
Not only was like, who's this guy, but also um, I'm still acutely aware that I'm also Black and Japanese, and I'm not just Japanese.
Hmm.
And that has weight sometimes in ways that I don't want it to, or other ways that
Right.
are not fun. Um, Other ways, it's like I get remembered.
Right, that's true.
So, and, but but again, I think I can only do that because I have some folks that ground me,
Hmm.
and they're people. I think we can all. I think there are people like that in your lives if you look. Um, and sometimes, if the person, sometimes you have to ask. The beauty is if we allow it, is that we can learn from each other, we can be shaped from each other,
Hmm.
but in having that happen, it doesn't change the essence of who we are.
Okay.
You know, find your essence, hold on to that essence, and then be wonderfully flavored by everything around you. But sometimes it doesn't come together well, and it's a dumpster fire, but you keep coming back. I mean, there's lots of different metaphors I could use, but it's the whole notion of gaman, right? That
Hmm.
sense of persistence, just whether it's that or you know fall down, fall down 7, get up 8, whatever
Hmm.
you want to say. But you know, I just hope I can say it's worth the fight.
Yeah.
It is, and the fight can be fun, but fun doesn't is not the antithesis of hard work. But if you allow it to be.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think that's incredibly helpful. And I love how you said how identity can be fluid and it can also, depending on the situation, you can also seem like you're part of a community exclusively, but in your you can also hold on to your essence and remain true to yourself and know that you belong to all these different communities as well.
It's our own different normal.
Hmm. Hmm.
Embrace it. Um, yeah, it's fun. Let it be fun.
Thank you very much.
All
I just
right.
love what you. Yeah, thank you.